Jinna Park stood in front of the massive window that looked out into space. The stars seemed close enough to touch, but she knew they were millions of miles away. The diplomatic station called Harmony's Edge floated peacefully around a planet that looked like a blue marble. This was her first time so far from Earth, and everything felt strange. The corridor behind her buzzed with activity. Aliens walked past her in every direction. Some floated in the air inside clear bubbles. Others made musical sounds when they moved. A few looked almost like humans, but had skin that sparkled like diamonds. Gina had studied pictures of these species for months, but seeing them in person was completely different. She wore her best military uniform. The dark blue fabric was pressed perfectly, and her boots shined like mirrors. Every button was in place, and her hair was pulled back. In a tight bun, she had to look perfect because she represented all of humanity today, 3 months ago. Jinna had been training new recruits at the military base in Seoul. Then Ambassador Kim had called her into his office with news that changed her life. Earth had been accepted for a trial membership in the Galactic Council. They needed someone to serve as both security officer and cultural guide. Someone who could stay calm under pressure and represent humanity well. "Why me?" Gina had asked. "Because you understand people," the ambassador had said. "And because when trouble comes, you know how to handle it without making things worse." Now she was here, billions of miles from home, trying to prove that humans deserved a place among the stars. The station was bigger than any building Jinna had ever seen. The main corridor stretched for almost a mile in each direction. The ceiling was so high that small aircraft could fly through it. Everything was made of some kind of white metal that never seemed to get dirty. Strange symbols in dozens of languages covered the walls. But translation devices made sure everyone could understand each other. Ambassador Kim appeared beside her, his face showing the stress of the past few weeks. He was older than Jinna by 20 years, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. He had spent his whole career preparing for this moment. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," Jinna replied, though her stomach felt tight with nerves. "Good. Let me remind you about today's schedule." Kim pulled out a small device that showed their appointments. "First, we meet with the Vorthok delegation. They communicate through sound frequencies, so speak slowly and clearly. Then lunch with the nebulae representatives. They float in those containment suits, but they're very friendly. Finally, the formal presentation to the Security Council." Yena nodded. She had memorized all of this already, but it helped to hear it again. "Remember," Kim continued, "we're still on probation. Every species here had to prove they could be peaceful before joining the council. Some of them took decades to gain full membership. We have 6 months to show that humans can coexist with other civilizations." "What happens if we fail?" Jinal asked. Kim's expression grew serious. "Then Earth stays isolated. No trade, no technology sharing, no protection from hostile species. We'll be on our own in a very dangerous galaxy." They walked together down the main corridor. Other beings moved around them, some in groups, others alone. Gina noticed how they looked at her. Some seemed curious, others worried. A few appeared openly hostile. "They call us Deathworlders," Kim explained quietly. "Earth is considered one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Most worlds don't have predators, natural disasters, or diseases like ours. To them, we're like warriors who grew up in hell." "Is that bad?" Jana asked. "It can be. Some species think we're too violent to trust. Others believe we're useful allies. We need to show them we can be both strong and peaceful." They passed a group of tall, elegant beings with skin that looked like living crystal. Their spines glowed with internal light, and they moved with perfect grace. These were the Rylans, the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had controlled Galactic politics for over 1,000 years. One of the Rylans watched Jinna as she walked by. His eyes were cold and calculating. She felt like he was studying her, looking for weaknesses. The feeling made her uncomfortable, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's Prince Wu Jin," Kim whispered. "He leads the Rylan delegation. Be very careful around him. The Rylans aren't sure humans should be allowed into the council." "Why not?" Yena asked. "They think we're unpredictable, dangerous. They prefer species they can control or at least predict. Humans are neither. They reached the Vorthok meeting room. The crystalline beings inside looked like living diamonds that had learned to walk. When they spoke, it sounded like music played on glass instruments. The translation device in Jinna's ear turned their words into Korean. The meeting went well. The Vorthok were interested in human art and music. They had never heard sounds like the ones humans made. Jinna played recordings of traditional Korean music, and the Vorthok listened. With what seemed like joy, next came lunch with the nebulae. These beings looked like colored clouds trapped in clear suits. They floated instead of walking and spoke in whispers that sounded like wind through leaves. They asked many questions about Earth's weather and were amazed by the concept of rain. "World sounds beautiful and terrible," one of them said. "How do you survive such violence?" "We adapt," Jinna replied. "We learn to be strong. That is why some fear you," the nebulae said. "Strength can be dangerous in the wrong hands." The final meeting was with the full Security Council. Representatives from 50 different species sat in a huge circular room. Kina stood in the center and gave her presentation about human culture, values, and goals for galactic membership. She spoke about Earth's history, both the good and the bad. She explained how humans had learned from their mistakes and worked to become better. She talked about their desire for peace and their willingness to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. The questions came fast and hard. Some delegates asked about human wars. Others wanted to know about Earth's weapons. A few questioned whether humans could be trusted with advanced technology. Jin Dashia answered honestly. Yes, humans had fought wars. Yes, they had made mistakes. But they had also learned to cooperate, to build, to explore, and to dream of better futures. When it was over, Kim smiled at her. "Well done," he said. But Jinna noticed Prince Wujian watching her from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her think this was just the beginning. That night, alone in her quarters, Yenna looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there was Earth, with its blue oceans and white clouds. She had promised to represent her world well, but she was starting to understand that the galaxy was more complicated than anyone had told her. Some species wanted humans to succeed. Others were waiting for them to fail. A few, like the Rylans, might be actively working to make sure that failure happened. Na trained her whole life to protect people and solve problems. Now she faced her biggest challenge yet. The future of humanity in the galaxy might depend on how well she could navigate the dangerous waters of galactic politics. She was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks had passed since Gina first arrived at Harmony's Edge. The routine was becoming familiar now. Morning briefings with Ambassador Kim, meetings with different alien delegations, and endless paperwork about cultural exchanges and trade agreements. She had learned to eat the strange foods that didn't make her sick and to sleep, despite the artificial gravity that felt just slightly wrong. Most of the alien delegates had warmed up to her. The Vorthok enjoyed her music recommendations and had started sharing their own crystal songs. The nebulae asked her daily questions about Earth's weather patterns and seemed fascinated by the concept of seasons. Even some of the smaller delegations had begun treating her as a friend rather than a curiosity. But the Rylans remained cold and distant. Prince Ujin seemed to appear wherever Jinna went, not obviously following her, but always present at the edge of her vision. During meetings, he would ask questions that sounded polite but felt like traps. He would comment on human history in ways that made their past conflicts sound barbaric. He never said anything directly insulting, but his meaning was always clear. Humans were violent. Humans were dangerous. Humans did not belong here. Today was different. Today was the cultural exchange ceremony held in the station's grand atrium. Each species would demonstrate something important from their culture. It was meant to build understanding and friendship between the different civilizations. The atrium was the most beautiful part of the station. The ceiling was transparent, showing the stars and the planet below. Plants from dozens of worlds grew in careful arrangements. Water flowed in impossible patterns, defying gravity to create floating streams and waterfalls. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the space. Jin-R had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had practiced every movement until it was perfect. Ambassador Kim had approved her choice, though he seemed nervous about it. "Are you sure about this?" he had asked during their final rehearsal. "Some species might see it as aggressive." "It's not aggressive," Jinna had replied. "It's disciplined. There's a difference." Now she stood in the center of the atrium, wearing a simple white outfit that allowed her to move freely. The crowd had grown quiet, waiting to see what the human would do. Jinna took a deep breath and began. She moved through the ancient forms of Taekwondo, each motion flowing into the next like water. Her kicks cut through the air with precise control. Hands moved in patterns that looked like dancing, but contained deadly purpose. Every movement showed power held back, strength used only as much as needed. This was what she wanted them to see, not the violence that many feared, but the discipline that controlled it. The art of knowing when to strike and when to hold back. The beauty that could exist in something dangerous when it was mastered completely. The crowd watched in silence. Some beings had never seen anything like human martial arts. Others had heard stories but never witnessed the reality. Nan could feel their attention like weight on her shoulders. She finished with a series of high kicks that stopped just short of invisible targets. Her final pose was perfectly balanced, one leg raised, arms extended, breathing controlled despite the intensity of the demonstration. For a moment, the atrium was completely silent. Then the applause began. The Vorthok created musical appreciation that sounded like crystal chimes. The nebulae pulsed with colors that meant approval in their language. Even some of the more reserved species showed signs of respect. Jin-Ah bowed to the audience and stepped back. She had done what she came to do. She had shown them that humans could be both powerful and controlled. Dangerous and beautiful at the same time. That was when Prince Wu Jin approached her. He moved with the liquid grace that all Rylans possessed. His crystalline spine caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. Other beings stepped aside to let him pass, showing the respect and fear that his species commanded throughout the galaxy. "Quite impressive," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality that made Ryland's speech sound like singing. His translator turned the words into Korean, but Gina could hear the tone underneath. Cold, calculating, dismissive. Prince Wujin stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see her reflection in his diamond-like skin. His height forced her to look up at him, which she knew was intentional. Everything the Rylans did was intentional. "Charming," he continued, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. For a Deathworlder, the conversations around them stopped. Jinnah could feel the attention of dozens of species focusing on this moment. She could see Ambassador Kim pushing through the crowd, his face showing concern and warning. She could hear the whispers starting as beings realized what was happening. This was not casual conversation. This was not a simple compliment. This was a test, a challenge, a trap laid carefully and sprung at the perfect moment. Jin-Ah understood immediately what Prince Wujin was doing. He had waited 3 weeks, watching her, learning her patterns. He had chosen this moment when she was surrounded by potential allies, when her demonstration had earned their respect. Now he was forcing her to choose. She could accept the insult gracefully, showing that humans could be pushed around and dismissed. That would prove his point that Deathworlders were weak, despite their reputation. Or she could respond with anger, showing that humans were indeed too violent and emotional for civilized society. Either choice would serve his purpose. Either choice would help him argue that humanity did not belong in the Galactic Council. But Prince Wujin had made one mistake. He assumed that those were her only options. Jin-Ah smiled, not the polite diplomatic smile she had worn for weeks. Not the fake expression of someone pretending to be happy. This was something else entirely. This was the smile of someone who had just realized that her opponent had walked into a trap of his own making. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the atrium. Prince Wujin's expression shifted slightly. He had expected anger or submission. He had not expected calm acceptance. He had not expected her to look genuinely pleased by his comment. "I appreciate the compliment," Jinnah continued, taking a small step closer to him, especially coming from someone with such an impressive spine. Now the words seemed innocent enough, but something in her tone made Prince Wujin straighten slightly. Around them, the crowd seemed to sense that something important was happening, but most did not understand what Jin-Ah could see the calculation in the prince's eyes. He was trying to figure out what she was planning, how she would respond. To his provocation, he knew that humans were dangerous when pushed too far, but he also knew that this was a diplomatic station. Violence here would end any chance of human membership in the council. What he did not know was that Jinnah had spent 3 weeks studying more than just alien cultures and customs. She had studied their anatomy, their strengths, and their weaknesses. She had studied the Rillan spine structure and learned something very interesting about their supposedly invulnerable crystalline vertebrae. She had learned exactly how much pressure it would take to turn that beautiful spine into splinters. Prince Wujin was still calculating, still trying to predict her next move, when Jinnah made her decision. A smile never left her face as she moved. Faster than most beings in the atrium could follow. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through the suddenly silent space, like the ringing of a bell. Prince Wujin collapsed to the floor like a broken statue. His tall, graceful form crumpled in a way that looked wrong, as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. The beautiful crystalline spine that had caught the light and thrown back rainbows now lay scattered across the polished floor in thousands of glittering pieces. He was still alive. His chest rose and fell with shallow breathing. His eyes were open and aware, filled with shock and something that might have been respect. But from the neck down, he could not move at all. Na had struck with perfect precision, breaking the exact vertebrae that would paralyze without killing. The silence in the atrium lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted, being scattered in every direction. The Vorthok made sounds like breaking glass as they fled toward the exits. The nebulae collapsed their floating forms and rolled away in their containment suits. Smaller species simply ran, their various limbs carrying them as fast as possible away from the human, who had just done the impossible. Security drones swarmed down from the ceiling like angry insects. Red lights flashed throughout the station as alarms began to sound. The automatic defense systems activated, creating energy barriers between Jinnah and the other delegates. Emergency medical units rushed toward the fallen prince. Through it all, Jinnah stood perfectly still. She made no attempt to run or hide. She did not try to explain her actions or justify what she had done. She simply waited, her hands at her sides, as the galaxy reacted to what it had just witnessed. Ambassador Kim reached her first. Pushing through the crowd of fleeing aliens and security personnel, his face was pale with shock and fear. Behind him came the station's security chief, a large being from a species Jin did not recognize, along with a squad of armed guards. "What have you done?" Kim whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarms. Yenna looked at him calmly. "What was necessary?" she replied. The security chief stepped forward, his weapon drawn, but not yet pointed at Yenna. "Lieutenant Park, you are under arrest for assault on a diplomatic envoy. Do not resist." Jinnah nodded and held out her hands to be restrained. The magnetic bonds that closed around her wrists were designed to hold beings much stronger than humans, but she did not test them. She had known this moment would come from the second she decided to act. As they led her away, she could see the medical teams working on Prince Wujin. The Rillan medical technology was advanced, but she knew they would not be able to repair his spine completely.
Oh, the damage was too precise, too thorough.
He would live, but he would never again stand tall and look down on others with superiority. The detention cell was small, but comfortable. It had a bed, a table, and a window that looked out at the stars. Na sat on the bed and waited. She knew that within hours, her actions would be known throughout the galaxy. The human who had broken the unbreakable prince. The Deathworlder who had turned the most powerful being in the station into a collection of crystal fragments. Ambassador Kim came to see her an hour later. The guards let him into the cell, but stayed close enough to listen to every word. "Understand what you have done?" he asked, sitting heavily in the single chair. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. "Yes," Jinnah said simply. "The Rylans are demanding your immediate execution. They say what you did was an act of war against their empire. They want Earth excluded from the Council permanently." "I expected that." Kim stared at her. You planned this. You knew exactly what would happen when you attacked him. I did not attack him, Jinnah corrected. I responded to a formal challenge to humanity's fitness for galactic civilization. What are you talking about? Nas stood and walked to the window. The planet below looked peaceful from here, its blue and green surface unmarked by the political storm raging on the station above. I spent 3 weeks studying galactic law, she said. Not just the basic diplomatic protocols you taught me, but the deep legal codes that govern interspecies relations. Did you know there was a clause in the Council Charter about challenges to species capability? Kim frowned. That law is ancient. It has not been used in over 1,000 years. But it still exists. If a representative of one species formally questions another species' fitness for council membership, the challenged species has the right to demonstrate their capabilities through direct action. Prince Wu Jin never formally challenged us. Na turned back to face him. He called me charming for a Deathworlder, in front of representatives from 50 different species. That phrase in that context constitutes a formal declaration that humans are inferior and unfit for equal treatment in galactic society. Kim was quiet for a long moment. Even if that were true, your response was completely disproportionate. You could have simply filed a formal complaint. Could I? Na asked. What would have happened then? A committee would have studied the matter for months. The Rylans would have argued that it was a misunderstanding, that no insult was intended. Meanwhile, they would have continued their campaign to undermine human membership. What campaign? Na smiled grimly. You have not noticed? Every trade agreement we have tried to negotiate has fallen through at the last minute. Every species that seemed interested in working with us has suddenly become distant. The Rylan delegation has been visiting other delegations privately, spreading doubts about human reliability and stability. Kim's expression grew troubled. He was beginning to understand that there had been forces at work that he had not seen. They had been setting us up to fail from the beginning, Jinnah continued. Prince Wu Jin's insult was meant to be the final push. Either we would accept it, quietly proving that humans can be dismissed and ignored, or we would respond with crude violence, proving that we are too dangerous for civilized society. So you gave them exactly what they wanted. No, Jinnah said firmly. I gave them what they did not expect. Violence, yes, but precise violence. Controlled violence. Violence with a purpose and a message. What message? Jinnah walked back to the window and looked out at the stars. That humans understand both strength and restraint. That we can be pushed, but only so far. That we are dangerous when we choose to be, but we choose carefully. You could have killed him, yes, but I did not. I could have made it look like an accident, but I did not. I could have claimed temporary insanity or cultural misunderstanding, but I will not. Every species in that atrium saw exactly what I wanted them to see. Kim stood up slowly. And what was that? The age of Rylan dominance is ending? That there is a new power in the galaxy, one that will not be intimidated or controlled. That humanity has arrived, and we will not be dismissed as charming pets or feared as mindless beasts. You realize they will put you on trial for this. Na nodded. I am counting on it. You could be executed. Perhaps. Or perhaps the galaxy will learn some uncomfortable truths about how the Rylans have maintained their power for the past 1,000 years. Kim stared at her for a long moment. You have gambled everything on this moment, not just your life, but Earth's entire future in galactic society. Yes, Jinnah agreed. But it was a gamble we were going to lose anyway. The Rylans would never have allowed us to succeed through normal diplomatic channels. They see us as a threat to their authority, and they were right to do so. So you decided to prove their point. Jinnah turned back to him one final time. I decided to show them the difference between a threat and a promise. Prince Wu Jin spent 3 weeks testing our limits, seeing how far he could push before we broke. Now he knows. The guards returned then, indicating that the visit was over. As Ambassador Kim was led away, he looked back at Jinnah one last time. I hope you know what you are doing, he said. Jin-Ah smiled. So do I. Alone again, she sat back down on the bed and closed her eyes. In a few hours, the The most important trial in galactic history would begin. The future of humanity among the stars would be decided by beings who had never set foot on Earth, had never felt the weight of gravity that tried to crush them every day they lived. But they had seen what that gravity had created. They had seen what it meant to be a Deathworlder. Now they would have to decide whether that was something to fear or something to respect. The courtroom was the largest space on Harmony's edge. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy filled the curved rows of seats that surrounded the central floor. The ceiling was transparent, showing the stars above as if the universe itself was watching this trial. Jin-Ah sat in the defendant's chair, wearing simple clothes provided by the station. Her hands were free now, but energy barriers surrounded her on all sides. Across the room, Prince Wu Jin lay on a medical platform, his broken spine visible through the transparent support equipment that kept him alive. The judge was a member of the Eternal Council, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Her name was impossible for human vocal cords to pronounce, so everyone called her Judge Keeper. She had lived for over 3,000 years and had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. This court will now hear the case of the Galactic Council versus Lieutenant Jin Park of Earth, Judge Keeper announced. Her voice sounded like wind through ancient trees. The defendant is charged with assault on a diplomatic envoy, a crime, punishable by death or permanent exile. The prosecutor stood first. Her name was Bei Sujin, and she was human. Ambassador Kim had insisted that Earth provide its own prosecutor to show that humans believed in justice even when it worked against them. Sujin was young, but brilliant, one of the best legal minds Earth had ever produced. Your Honor, Sujin began, the facts of this case are simple and undisputed. The defendant attacked a diplomatic envoy without provocation, causing severe injury. That will affect Prince Wu Jin for the rest of his life. There can be no excuse for such violence in a place dedicated to peace. Sujin walked to the center of the courtroom, where a holographic display showed the moment of Jinna's attack. The image played over and over, showing her precise strike and the prince's collapse. The defendant claimed she was responding to a challenge, Sujin continued. But words, no matter how insulting, do not justify violence. If we accept such excuses, we open the door to chaos. Every heated argument could become a battle. Every disagreement could end in bloodshed. The prosecutor spoke for an hour, building her case with careful logic. She quoted galactic law and precedent. She showed medical reports of the prince's injuries. She argued that humanity's violent nature made them unfit for galactic civilization. The defendant's actions prove what many have long suspected, Sujin concluded. Humans are too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to resort to violence. When challenged, for the safety of all civilized species, they must be excluded from the council and confined to their own system. When she finished, murmurs ran through the courtroom. Many beings nodded in agreement. The case seemed clear. Jinnah had committed an act of violence that could not be justified. Then the defense attorney stood up. His name was Counselor Daeho-min, and he was also human. But unlike the prosecutor, he was old and experienced. He had spent decades studying galactic law and had represented dozens of species in various legal matters. His reputation for finding hidden truths was known throughout the galaxy. Your Honor, Min began, my colleague has presented a compelling case, but she has told only part of the story. With the court's permission, I would like to present evidence that will change how we view these events. Judge Keeper nodded. Proceed, Min activated. His own holographic display, instead of showing the moment of attack, it showed the 3 weeks leading up to it. Surveillance footage from throughout the station revealed a pattern that most observers had missed. Prince Wu Jin did not insult Lieutenant Park on impulse, Min explained. This was the culmination of a carefully planned campaign to undermine human membership in the council. The display showed meeting after meeting, where Rillan representatives spoke privately with other delegations. The audio was often unclear, but translation algorithms revealed the topics of conversation. Human aggression, human unpredictability, human unfitness for civilized society. The Rylands have been systematically poisoning other species against humanity, Min continued. They have used their influence to sabotage trade negotiations, delay colonization requests, and spread fear about human intentions. Gasps came from the gallery as the evidence mounted. Trade agreements that had fallen through at the last minute, cultural exchanges that had been mysteriously canceled, military cooperation proposals that had been rejected without explanation. But why? Judge Keeper asked.
Why would the Rylands work so hard to exclude humanity?
Min smiled grimly. They recognize what many others have not. Humanity represents a fundamental threat to Rylan dominance of galactic politics. The display changed to show comparative data between human and Rylan military capabilities. On paper, the Rylands seemed superior in every way. Their technology was more advanced, their ships were faster, their weapons were more powerful. But there is one area where humans excel, Min said. Adaptability, creativity, the ability to find solutions that others cannot imagine. These are the gifts of a Deathworld species, forged by millions of years of surviving on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. The courtroom grew quiet as Min continued his presentation. He showed how human innovations in their short time on the galactic stage had already begun to influence other species. New approaches to engineering, medicine, and diplomacy that challenged established methods. The Rylands have maintained their power for 1,000 years through a simple strategy, Min explained. They identify potential rivals early in work, to eliminate them before they become threats. They have done this to dozens of species over the centuries. New evidence appeared on the display, historical records of other species that had shown promise, only to suffer mysterious setbacks that prevented their rise, worlds that had experienced unexplained disasters, civilizations that had suddenly found themselves isolated and struggling. The crystalline Vorthok alliance with the Rylands was not voluntary, Min revealed. Several Vorthok colonies suffered catastrophic equipment failures that could only have been caused by sabotage. The Rylands offered protection in exchange for subordination. Representatives from the Vorthok delegation began making agitated musical sounds. Through the translation system, their distress was clear. They had never spoken of these incidents publicly, but the evidence was now undeniable. The nebulae trade disputes were not caused by economic differences, Min continued. They were orchestrated by Rylan agents who manipulated market prices and created artificial shortages. More species began to react as their own experiences were revealed.
The pattern became clear.
Any species that showed independence or potential was systematically undermined until they accepted Rylan dominance or disappeared entirely. Prince Wujin's insult was not casual arrogance, Min said, returning to the central charge. It was a calculated provocation designed to force exactly the response we witnessed. If Lieutenant Park had accepted the insult, it would have proven human weakness. If she had responded with crude violence, it would have proven human unfitness for civilized society. Judge Keeper leaned forward. Are you suggesting the defendant's actions were justified? I am suggesting they were necessary, Min replied. The prince expected either submission or mindless aggression. He did not expect tactical precision. Lieutenant Park's response sent a message that could not be misunderstood. Humanity will not be intimidated, controlled, or dismissed. The display showed the medical analysis of Gina's strike. The precision required to damage the exact vertebrae that would paralyze without killing. The years of training necessary to achieve such control. The split-second decision to use exactly the right amount of force. This was not the action of a mindless savage, Min argued. This was the calculated response of a trained professional who understood exactly what she was doing and why it was necessary. Prince Wujin, listening from his medical platform, tried to speak. His voice was weak but audible through the court's amplification system. The human is correct, he said, shocking everyone in the courtroom. I underestimated their species. I saw only primitive violence where there was actually sophisticated strategic thinking. The courtroom erupted in surprised chatter. No one had expected the victim to support the defense. I insulted Lieutenant Park deliberately, the prince continued. I wanted to provoke her into proving that humans were too dangerous for galactic society. Instead, she proved that they are too valuable to exclude. Judge Keeper called for order as the noise level rose. When quiet returned, she looked directly at Jin, defendant. Do you have anything to say before this court renders judgment? Jinna stood slowly. She had remained silent throughout the trial, letting the evidence speak for itself. Now, for the first time, she would address the court directly. Your Honor, she began, I am a soldier. I was trained to protect people and to make hard decisions under pressure. 3 weeks ago, I came here believing that diplomacy meant avoiding conflict at all costs. I have learned that sometimes diplomacy requires demonstrating that you are too dangerous to ignore and too valuable to eliminate. She paused, looking around the courtroom at the representatives of dozens of species. Prince Wu Jin tested our limits to see where we would break. I showed him that we do not break. We adapt. We respond. We survive. These are the gifts of our death world, and they are what we offer to the galaxy. The hour of deliberation stretched into 3 hours. Jinnah remained in the courtroom, watching through the transparent ceiling as ships arrived and departed from the station. News of the trial had spread throughout the galaxy, and representatives from dozens of minor species were rushing to Harmony's Edge to witness the outcome. Ambassador Kim sat in the front row, his face showing the strain of the past few days. Other human delegates had arrived from Earth, including military advisors and legal experts. They all watched Jinnah with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. When Judge Keeper finally returned, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Beings floated in the air and pressed against the walls. The tension was so thick it seemed to vibrate in the recycled air. This court has reached a decision, Judge Keeper announced. Her ancient voice carried easily through the silent space. But before we render judgment, we must address the broader implications of what has been revealed during these proceedings. She gestured to the holographic displays that still showed evidence of Rillan manipulation over the centuries. The accusations made by the defense are serious. They suggest a pattern of behavior that violates the fundamental principles of the Galactic Council. A section of the courtroom opened, and several new figures entered. These were representatives from species that had not been present during the original trial. Jinnah recognized some of them from her studies, but others were completely unknown to her. In the past 3 hours, Judge Keeper continued, 17 additional species have come forward with evidence supporting the defense's claims. The court will now hear their testimony. The first to speak was a representative of the Spiral Collective, a group of species that had been minor players in galactic politics for centuries. Their spokesperson was a tall, thin being with skin that shifted colors as they spoke. The Rillan Empire offered us protection from space pirates 20 years ago, the spokesperson said. We accepted gratefully. What we did not know was that the pirates were being supplied with information about our shipping routes by Rillan agents. When we tried to develop our own defense forces, we discovered that our weapon systems had been sabotaged during routine maintenance by Rillan technicians. Murmurs ran through the courtroom. This was exactly the pattern that defense attorney Min had described. The next speaker was from the Singing Worlds, a collection of planets known for their artistic achievements. Their representative looked like a living sculpture made of flowing metal. We had developed new forms of art that were becoming popular throughout the galaxy, they said. Cultural exchange programs were spreading our influence. Then our primary art centers began experiencing power failures and equipment malfunctions. When we investigated, we found Rylan-made components that had been programmed to fail at specific times. One by one, the representatives told their stories. Species that had been prevented from developing advanced technology. Worlds that had suffered mysterious disasters just as they were gaining independence. Civilizations that had been forced into subordinate relationships after their economies were secretly manipulated. The crystalline Vorthok delegation finally spoke about the incidents they had never discussed publicly. Their representative's musical, the voice was filled with pain as they described watching their colony worlds die from equipment failures that made no scientific sense. We accepted Rylan protection because we believed we had no choice, they sang. We thought we were weak. We thought we were unlucky. We never imagined that our suffering was deliberately caused. Judge Keeper listened to each testimony with growing concern. Scope of Rillan manipulation was far broader than anyone had suspected. For over 1,000 years, they had been systematically preventing the rise of any potential rivals. Prince Wujin watched from his medical platform as species after species described how his empire had destroyed their hopes and dreams. His expression was difficult to read, but something in his eyes suggested that even he had not known the full extent of his people's actions. "The evidence presented to this court is overwhelming," Judge Keeper said when the testimonies were complete. "The Rillan Empire has violated the most basic principles of the Galactic Council. They have used their position to prevent the natural development of other civilizations." She turned her attention back to Gina. "However, this does not automatically excuse the defendant's actions. Violence against a diplomatic envoy remains a serious crime, regardless of the circumstances that led to it." The courtroom fell silent again. Despite all the revelations about Rillan manipulation, Gina's fate was still uncertain. The court must balance several competing interests, Judge Keeper continued. The need for diplomatic immunity, the right of species to defend themselves against systematic oppression, and the question of proportional response to provocation. She paused for a long moment, her ancient eyes studying Jin carefully. The defendant's actions were precise, calculated, and limited in scope. She could have killed Prince Wujin, but chose not to. She could have claimed ignorance or cultural misunderstanding, but chose to accept full responsibility. She demonstrated both the capability for violence and the wisdom to restrain it. Yuna felt her heart beating faster. The judge's words could go either way. Furthermore, Judge Keeper said, the evidence suggests that the defendant was responding not just to a personal insult, but to a systematic campaign designed to exclude her species from galactic civilization. In this context, her actions constitute a legitimate response to an existential threat.
Wow.
The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. People were beginning to sense which way the judgment was heading. Therefore, Judge Keeper announced, this court finds the defendant not guilty of the charges against her. The courtroom erupted. Some beings cheered, others made sounds of disapproval, and many simply sat in stunned silence. Jinna felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she remained seated and composed. However, Judge Keeper continued, raising her voice over the noise, this court cannot ignore what has been revealed about Rillan activities. The Galactic Council must address these violations of our fundamental principles. She gestured to the Rillan delegation, which had remained silent throughout most of the proceedings. The Empire will face formal investigation into these allegations. If proven true, appropriate sanctions will be imposed. Prince Wujin struggled to speak from his medical platform. When the courtroom quieted, his voice was barely audible. Your Honor, he said, I do not speak for my entire empire, but I believe the time has come for change. My people have ruled through fear and manipulation for too long. Perhaps it is time to learn from species like humanity rather than suppressing them. His words shocked everyone present. No Rylan had ever admitted weakness or suggested that their methods were wrong. I propose a new doctrine, the prince continued. Instead of preventing the rise of other species, we should embrace it. Instead of fearing diversity, we should celebrate it. The galaxy is large enough for many different kinds of strength. Judge Keeper nodded slowly. The court recognizes Prince Wujin's statement and will consider it as part of our recommendations to the full council. She stood, indicating that the trial was officially over. This court is adjourned. Lieutenant Jinna Park is free to go. The energy barriers around Jinna dissolved. She stood slowly. Ambassador Kim rushed to her side, his face showing relief and pride. Other human delegates surrounded them, offering congratulations and support. But Jinna's attention was focused on Prince Wujin. Despite everything that had happened between them, she felt a strange sense of respect for his final statement. It took courage to admit that your entire civilization had been wrong for 1,000 years. She walked over to his medical platform, ignoring the Rillan guards who tensed at her approach. Your Highness, she said formally, I want you to know that I took no pleasure in what I did to you. Prince Wujin looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than they had before.
I know,
he replied. You did what you believed was necessary. For your people can respect that, even if I wish it had not been necessary. Perhaps now it will not be, Na said. Perhaps the prince agreed. Your people have taught the galaxy an important lesson about the difference between strength and brutality. I hope my people can learn from it. As Yina walked away from the courtroom, she realized that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The trial had been about more than her actions or even human membership in the council. It had been about power, justice, and the courage to stand up against oppression. The age of Rylan dominance was not over, but it was certainly changed. Other species would no longer accept suppression quietly. The galaxy had learned that even the most powerful empire could be challenged when its actions violated basic principles of fairness, and humanity had proven that Deathworlders could be both dangerous and wise, both strong and restrained. They had earned their place among the stars, not through submission or conquest, but through the courage to do what was right when it mattered most. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since arriving at Harmony's edge, Gina felt truly hopeful about what it might bring. 6 months had passed since the trial that changed everything. Nan stood in the same atrium where she had first demonstrated human martial arts, but everything was different now. The space buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible before. Her uniform was different too. Instead of the simple military dress she had worn as a lieutenant, she now wore the elaborate ceremonial outfit of a general in the newly created Galactic Defense Corps. The insignia on her shoulders marked her as Earth's first Galactic Defense Coordinator, a position that had been created specifically to address the galaxy's changing security needs. The transformation had not happened overnight. In the weeks following her acquittal, the Galactic Council had launched formal investigations into Rillan activities spanning centuries. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The Rillan Empire had not just suppressed potential rivals, they had actively prevented the natural evolution of galactic civilization. Species that should have become major powers had been kept weak and dependent. Technologies that could have benefited everyone had been suppressed or stolen. Art, culture, and scientific advancement had all been controlled to maintain Rillan dominance. But the galaxy had adapted. The revelation of Rillan manipulation had created a wave of independence movements across hundreds of worlds. Species that had accepted subordinate roles for generations suddenly found the courage to assert themselves. The balance of power that had remained stable for 1,000 years shifted in a matter of months. The changes were visible everywhere Jinna looked. Vorthok engineers worked alongside human technicians to develop new ship designs. Nebulae artists collaborated with Spiral Collective musicians to create performances that combined sound, light, and gravitational fields. Even some Rillan scientists had joined mixed-species research teams, eager to learn from approaches they had spent centuries suppressing. Ambassador Kim approached her across the atrium floor. He looked older but happier than she had ever seen him. The stress lines around his eyes had been replaced by the confident expression of someone who had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The council session went well, he reported. The Deathworld Doctrine has been officially adopted as galactic policy. Eunice smiled. The Deathworld Doctrine was something she had never expected to see. Instead of viewing dangerous worlds as sources of violent, untrustworthy species, the council now recognized them as crucibles that forged unique strengths. Species from harsh environments were no longer excluded from galactic civilization, but actively recruited for their problem-solving abilities and resilience. How many applications have we received? Jinna asked. 47 so far, Kim replied. Species from worlds with extreme gravity, toxic atmospheres, predator-filled ecosystems, and conditions we can barely imagine. All of them want to join. The galactic community, now that being a Deathworlder is seen as an advantage instead of a liability, Dawn nodded thoughtfully. Each new species would bring different perspectives and capabilities. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting and unpredictable place. Gosh. Any word from the Rylan Investigation Committee? She asked. Kim's expression grew more serious. They have completed their work. The formal announcement will be made next week, but I can tell you that the evidence was overwhelming. The Rillan Empire will face significant sanctions, including the loss of several of their council seats and restrictions on their military activities. How is Prince Wu-jin handling the changes? Better than anyone expected, Kim replied. Recovery has been remarkable. The new spine they built for him using hybrid crystal titanium technology is actually stronger than his original one. But more importantly, he has become one of the most vocal advocates for reform within Rillan society. Gina found this transformation fascinating. Prince, who had once embodied Rillan arrogance and superiority, had become a leader in his peoples. Effort to adapt to the new galactic reality. As if summoned by their conversation, Prince Wu-jin appeared at the edge of the atrium. He moved differently now, with less of the liquid grace that had once marked all Rylands. His new spine was visible through his translucent skin. The hybrid crystal titanium structure glowing with a different light than pure crystal. But there was something in his bearing that suggested strength rather than weakness. He approached Jinna and Kim with steady steps. The other beings in the atrium watched with curiosity. 6 months ago, such a meeting would have been unthinkable. Now it was simply another sign of how much had changed. Jinnal Park, Prince Wu-jin said, using Jinna's new title with obvious respect. Wanted to speak with you before I returned to the Rillan homeworld. Of course, Your Highness, Jinna replied. Despite everything that had happened between them, she still maintained diplomatic courtesy. I have been thinking about that day in this atrium, the prince said, about what you did and why you did it. I believe I understand now. Oh, you could have responded to my insult in many different ways. You could have ignored it, complained about it, or simply attacked me in anger. Instead, you chose the one response that would force the entire galaxy to confront uncomfortable truths. Jin Dasha considered his words carefully. I saw an opportunity to change the conversation, she admitted. Instead of defending humanity against charges of being too violent, I decided to demonstrate that we could be violent when necessary and controlled when appropriate. Prince Wu-jin nodded slowly. You turned our perceived strength against us. My people believed our crystalline spines made us invulnerable. You showed the galaxy that every strength can become a weakness if you understand it well enough. What will you do now? Jinna asked. I will work to rebuild my people's relationship with the rest of the galaxy, the prince replied. It will not be easy. Many species have good reasons to distrust us. But I believe we can earn back their respect through our actions rather than our power. Change is never easy, Ambassador Kim observed, but it is often necessary. Prince Wu-jin smiled, an expression that looked strange on his crystalline features. Your people have taught us that lesson well. The question now is whether we are wise enough to learn from it. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Jinna. I want you to know that I bear you no resentment for what you did to me. In breaking my spine, you may have saved my people's future. After he left, Jinna and Kim stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The atrium continued to buzz with activity around them as beings from across the galaxy worked together on projects that would shape their collective future. Do you ever regret what you did? Kim asked quietly. Jin-Ah thought about the question. Seriously, her action had set off a chain of events that had reshaped galactic civilization. Billions of beings were living different lives because of the choice she had made in this very spot. No, she said finally, I regret that it was necessary. But I do not regret doing it. The galaxy is a more chaotic place now, Kim observed. The old stability is gone. Stability built on oppression is not really stability, Genna replied. It is just controlled stagnation. Real stability comes from balance, and balance requires that all parties have the power to defend their interests. Kim smiled. You sound like a philosopher now? Maybe I always was one. I just needed the right circumstances to discover it. A young human officer approached them with a datapad containing the day's reports. Jinna recognized her as Lieutenant So-Young Lee, one of the new graduates from Earth's diplomatic corps. The program had expanded dramatically since humanity's acceptance into the galactic community. General Lieutenant Lee said, We have received 3 new requests for Deathworld species integration, 2 proposals for joint military exercises, and an invitation for you to speak at the Galactic Security Conference next month. Nan accepted the datapad and reviewed the information quickly. Each item represented opportunities and challenges that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Schedule meetings for all the integration requests, she instructed. Accept the invitation to speak, but make sure Ambassador Kim reviews my remarks before I deliver them. As for the military exercises, I want detailed proposals from each species involved. Lieutenant Lee nodded and hurried away to implement the orders. Jinna watched her go, remembering her own nervousness during her first days on the station. Next generation will grow up in a very different galaxy, Kim observed. A better one, I hope, Yuna replied. She looked around the atrium one more time, taking in the sight of dozens of species working together freely for the first time in centuries. The Rylands were still there, but they were no longer the unchallenged masters of galactic politics. The Vorthoks sang their crystal songs without fear of suppression. The Nebulae shared their atmospheric dances with anyone interested in learning. New species arrived daily, bringing fresh perspectives and capabilities. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes difficult to manage. But it was also alive with possibility in a way that the old order had never been. Jin-Ah had come to Harmony's Edge as a simple military officer tasked with helping humanity prove they belonged in galactic society. She was leaving as a general, whose actions had fundamentally changed what that society looked like. The Deathworlders were no longer outsiders begging for acceptance. They were valued partners whose unique strengths were recognized and celebrated. The galaxy had learned that charm and lethality were not opposites, but complementary tools and the kit of civilized beings. And perhaps most importantly, everyone had learned that sometimes the most diplomatic thing you can do is demonstrate that you are too dangerous to ignore and too valuable to eliminate. As Jinna walked toward her transport, preparing to return to Earth for her first vacation in 6 months, she smiled at the thought of how much had changed. The girl who had once stood nervously in this corridor, worried about representing humanity properly, had become the woman who had reshaped galactic civilization. The stars looked the same through the transparent walls, but everything else was different. And that, Jinna thought, was exactly how it should be.